education. He has experience in Spiritist education and gave seminars in different countries promoting the Spiritism. And he will talk about the theme about Spiritism and more in the future. So, with a round of applause, please welcome with me, Georgie.
My friends, I already consider you my friends because we've been here together since the beginning of our works, where we had the opportunity to bring everybody today a trip throughout time about the arrival on earth of the Spiritist doctrine. Although when we observe the beginning in the part called prolegomens, we can observe a paragraph where Allan Kardec tells us that the spirits announced that there had come the time through the divine providence for the manifestation, for the universal manifestation of the spirits as God's ministers, as God's will's agent. And they came to bring to man this knowledge and also open a new era for humanity. That paragraph where he summarizes the work that was done, this organized invasion of the spirits in the beginning through the phenomenon of the spirits of the spinning tables. Behind it, there were serious men who were studying the phenomenon and trying to understand what the spirits were trying to bring to humanity, to show us the purity of Jesus' gospel that lasted the first 300 years of our era. During those 300 years, we kept that purity because on July 13 of 313, um, the Emperor Constantine told Christians that they had to live Christianity. And Constantine, at that point, was not able to allow that purity to stay because there were many interests behind it, the interests of the state, personal interests, their habits and customs at the time, because the Hebrew people brought to humanity the legacy of the only God. Because all around the Hebrews, it was about polytheism, the belief in many gods, idolatry, and different habits that we do not see in Jesus' message at any point in time. We don't see any adoration except for the Father, for God. We don't see images. We don't see anybody asking for the woman to put a piece of cloth on her head to pray. And at that time, they were pagan habits. And history tells us about the course of history we've had throughout the millennia. Naturally, using Jesus' own name, God's own name, for us to be able to answer our own interests, our own selfish interests, to the point that created the Crusades, that we were looking for a saint land, fight one another in search of power, And thus, humanity went through and lived for many years until when here we had the opportunity to get to know Jesus' direct disciple. And as immortal spirits that we are, this disciple comes back to earth as Francis of Assisi. It's interesting that many of us who have the opportunity to hear about Jesus, maybe even 2000 years ago, we may even have lived close to him, but we did not give him any attention. Time goes by and we still hear about him, but we're still not registering his teachings until we are finally touched by Francis, the one who was the most humble, more than anybody else, who brought the simplicity of the gospel and showing us that the path we're supposed to follow is the path of Jesus. And many of us have been touched by Francis. And then from that point on, we started our task to the day that we had the advent of Spiritist's contribution coming to us as the promised consoler. We had the opportunity to build throughout this opportunity his genesis, his development throughout the decades. And then nowadays we hear about Spiritism, naturally, even talking about the future of Spiritism. When we look at the Spirit's book again, we reach the conclusion in item 5 that we can observe Allan Kardec gives a classification of development to the Spiritist ideas. And he says that the Spiritist ideas has three periods. The first period is curiosity. The second is the period of science, philosophy. And the third is the period of applying the Spiritist ideas. When he explains these three periods, he talks about the time of curiosity. And he says that that time is gone, which was the time in which the physical effect phenomena happened, like the spinning tables. And after people were able to satisfy their curiosity, after that they were not curious anymore, and then that time was gone. The second time, which is the time of studying of science and philosophy, he states that that was the time where we would study the Spiritist doctrine, meditation of this doctrine's knowledge, and this doctrine brings all of us the opportunity to see life beyond life itself. We say that death, which is a phenomenon that we've been led to believe that is always something to be afraid of, or something we don't want to face in order to get to know what happens after. Spiritist doctrine comes to show us that Jesus had already killed death 2 years ago. The moment after the Golgotha, after the Calvary where he was crucified, as the scriptures had foreseen, he comes back again several times. Many people see him in several places, and he leaves no doubt that we are immortal. And the Spiritist doctrine explains that death is just a vessel of life to lead us. But still, we haven't learned that life, the life of the Spirit, is only one. It is created, we are created as mortals. We have had many existences. We've had several. Right now, we're living this one, and we still have many ahead of us with the objective of progressing because we are all God's children. We are immortal and we are all under his laws, which are eternal and perfect, and we are all under the law of progress. And our destination is perfection. How fast we are going to reach that perfection will depend on each one of us. The tool that the Father put in our hands for us to use it freely and spontaneously. But we need to be responsible for all the moral consequences that come from how we use our free will in order for us to keep going, to grow without without moving far from the divine laws. In the Spirit's book, question 614, where the moral laws start, Allan Kardec asks about what is the natural law. And the Spirit's answer that the natural law is God's law, is the divine law. It's eternal, it's forever. It's the only and true one that will lead us to happiness because they show what we're supposed to do and what we're not supposed to do. And we are unhappy because we move away from the natural law. When we read a bit more in the following questions, we are surprised in question 621a when it says that these laws are in our consciences, but that not only we moved away from them, but we have ignored them and forgotten them. That means that we have chosen to follow the path through our own free will, and we have chosen. We make our choices because of our own imperfections. According to God's law, we should be happy because we're humble. And the one who is humble is the one who is obedient. If we obey man's laws, if we follow if we follow country's laws, we are humble people. Even if it's a forced humility, because we don't act like this spontaneously, but because juridic law makes us makes us pay fines every time we break the law, or we can even be arrested, and in some countries they can even take our lives away. However, the divine laws will come and ask from us in different ways. According to God, we can behave freely. However, whatever we can sow, but whatever we harvest is always according to our actions. In the Spirit's book, it says that that second moment, that's the moment Kardec was going through the study, reflection, and philosophy that the doctrine Spiritist brings us in its three aspects so that we are able to know it, reflect on it, meditate on it, get from our cognitive and knowledge, take it to our feelings, and be able to apply it in our lives. When he talks about the Spiritist ideas at that moment, he says that that moment will inexorably come. The Spirit's book was written 160 years ago. And when we see other books that came from the book itself, which is made from four parts, and in each part, Kardec the codifier um, broke down those four parts. The first part is broken down in the book Genesis, and when we study that book in the chapter The Time Has Come, we will find a piece of information from a spirit, and he says that the time of transformation has come, and that this transformation that humanity is going through, and 100 years ago, we were already going through that change. That means that 100 before the Spiritist doctrine codification, this work of renewal, regeneration, transition that humanity is going through, that work had been happening for 100 years already. So that before the two that would come to us to console us, so that through that we'd go through this transition phase with faith, hope in the future that awaits for us in the construction of a new world of peace and joy. Right now, we are living days that are recognized by all humanity that are different, and everything has changed, be it the seasons of the year, people's behaviors, everything that demands more from us, like pandemics in terms of the physical body disease, and also diseases from our psyche, psychological problems, and those have grown so much, and it's taking humanity to observe and question and understand that these are new times, times when these things are really calling our attention because of how often they happen. Humanity has always had, during its existence, periods of transitions, and these transitions happen to bring progress and transformation. We can't grow if there are no changes. And we also learn that every change brings crisis. Every time there's a simple change, the crisis will be corresponding to that change. But when it's a global change, when it's a global at all levels and aspects, the crises that come with it will also be in all levels and aspects. If we ask any human being nowadays if you are at a different moment, they will say yes, and that's right. And if we ask if we are in the middle of a crisis, the answer will always be yes. But what kind of crisis? And the answer will obviously be of all kinds: political crisis, social crisis, ethics, moral, every, everything we say, humanity as a whole is going through a crisis in that aspect. It's not just for one region, not just one circumstance, but the whole earth. That shows us that we are living different moments, that it has, that the doctrine, Spiritist doctrine, has already recorded that. Genesis tells us about the new times, the time that has come, and that the spirits have already announced that them, as God's ministers, as agents of His will, they came to open a new era for humanity so that we can understand the process of transition that we're going through right now. When we observe the messages that the spirits bring us, since the very first messages when the codification came to us, we can see that throughout time they have been talking about these days, these moments of transition. They don't specify any dates, and they don't foresee the future, because noble and serious spirits know perfectly that the divine laws are, cannot be broken. And that's why they don't establish dates, because those dates can be changed, because because of humanity's free will. But they do announce that this moment has come since codification itself. And we heard here today about Adolfo Bezerra de Menezes, the spirit who, while he was incarnated, he worked so that the Union Fraternity, so that it could be part of all the followers of this new science, this new doctrine, in order for those followers, while they were going through their own transformation, they could use the feeling of fraternity, and so they could first of all transform themselves and then bring this Christian message to all of their brothers and sisters. So after 1900, after he discarnated, he continued helping the Spiritist movement with the responsibility to help us with the purpose to unite us so that we can bring Jesus' message to the whole of humanity under the Spiritist light. So we saw here before in the slides when we were talking about John. In reality, Jesus promised another consoler. So it's important to observe that. He didn't promise the consoler, he promised another consoler. The consoler is the gospel. At that time, he wasn't able to explain because at that time, humanity was not able to understand the teachings that Jesus' message brought us. We were not able to understand the depth. So at that time, when he spoke to his disciples, he did not treat, he did not talk about anything that was beyond their comprehension. The disciples would go a bit deeper in the knowledge of the gospel, and for the public, he would talk about universal ideas so that everybody could have an initial knowledge of his message, which would be known in the future with more details through the other consoler that he promised, that would come to do everything Jesus could not do at that time. The consoler came to us, and he came to show us as a new science that at the same time is a practical science of a philosophical doctrine. Science of experimentation shows us the relationship between the spirits. Well, we are all spirits, incarnate or discarnate. But in this laboratory that we have, which we call mediumship, that laboratory allows us this contact with both sides, and it teaches us the relationship we're supposed to have with each other in the dimension we find ourselves now, to live in peace, respecting others the way they are and not the way we want them to say, applying the golden rule to wish others what I wish for myself. This way, gratitude already exists the moment we act this way, because the moment we do unto others as we would have others do unto ourselves, we have goodwill. So we are happy because we wish others happiness, and we also have others be happy. Therefore, we can observe that in this process in which the Spiritist doctrine brings us this knowledge so that we learn to live with one another, to coexist in a practical way, not just in the mediumship laboratory, but in our daily lives, in our regular relationships, both in our relationship with the spiritual plane as with the physical plane. The Spiritist doctrine teaches us the best way to relate to each other. But as a philosophical doctrine, it teaches us all the consequences, all the moral consequences that come from these relations. It's very important for us to meditate more how we are relating to each other and what are the moral consequences of these relationships. And we can observe that the Spiritist doctrine comes to show us that it came to explain what is Spiritism in the book of the same name and telling us that the Spiritist doctrine is a science that came to tell us our origins, who we are, what we're doing here, where are we going, answering questions from thousands of years ago that humanity has been asking but hasn't found a satisfactory answer, but that the other consoler that is already among us is explaining to us, is clarifying as immortal spirits that we are. This way, we are living transition moments of transition, but with a tool that Jesus as God, that this instrument, this tool could come at the right time to help us as the consoler so that we go through these moments of transition. For some, sudden changes, for some, serious changes, which is leading humanity to a path that humanity itself has chosen throughout the millennia. This period is a period that comes before the era that is called the era of the Spirit. It's a time when humanity will recognize Jesus as the model and guide of humanity, whether they like it or not, inexorably. Humanity will recognize because we are walking towards what was promised. And the path we have chosen, the history of humanity, which is our history, because we are the main character of these stories, many of us sometimes say, oh, I was a king, I was a queen, but nobody says they were a nobody because history has not recorded their name. But when we look at their history, the path we chose did not include God's laws. If we choose to live history following God's law, we would be living much happier because naturally we would not go through the consequences of our relationships or these relationships with ourselves that ourselves bring, that we bring upon ourselves. So these are difficult times, that moments that lead us to several reflections. Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, throughout this period, has been showing us, also telling us that these days that have been announced were coming. He told us that these days of transformation were coming, as well as in chapter 18 of the Genesis, when he talks about our time, the new generation. Joana de Angelis, the mentor of the works that we realize in the physical plane, and her messages that come through the medium Divaldo Franco. Through her psychology, she brought us the knowledge, she brought to our knowledge a message about the planetary transition, and it's available for anybody who wants to see it. And Joanna also says that we are leaving these moments of transition, that humanity is going through a transition for the better, a world of peace that is being built by us so that we may enjoy this world of peace. These are moments we are living of say yes or say no. These are moments where we have to make choices because life is made of choices. But at this point in time, we cannot make wrong choices anymore. In the past, we were able to make wrong choices and we had many opportunities because the future reincarnations would allow us more opportunities to correct all of our mistakes from the past. But in 2010, we, we had in Brazil the third Spiritist Congress celebrating 100 years of Francisco Xavier's birth. At that time, at the closing of that Congress, Dr. Bezerra de Menezes, through Divaldo Franco's psychophony, brought a message. And I'm going to read a small part of this message. And Dr. Bezerra says, we are living new times. If you are living new times, it's a sign that the old times are gone. And he continues, these days show us a very important date, the change of the world of trials and expiation to a world of regeneration. Dr. Bezerra did not give the exact future date, and he had not announced any date before. That was April 18th, 2010. Coincidence or not, it was a date that coincides with the publication of the Spirit's book on the month and day that coincide with the year of 1857. And at that time, he announced us that that date was important for this transition from a world of trial and expiation to a world of a regeneration. But I would like to highlight that it wasn't on that day that we became a world of regeneration. I'll just do an analogy. We buy an object or something. So let's talk about food. I buy yogurt. It has a best before date. Those who are responsible for that food, they are specialists. They studied about it and they came to the conclusion that that food would have an expiry date. So I bought a yogurt and it says that on that day that food will expire. I left that yogurt in the fridge, and when I came to get it, it was the following day of the expiry date. So I looked at that yogurt and I think it's expired, so I throw it away. But then I think, is it possible that on midnight of that day, all the bacteria or everything that makes that food at exactly midnight, everything changed just to make the food expire the next day? Because I could have forgotten, not looked at the day, and have eaten the yogurt the next day anyway. And then I think I would be sick, and I would have the expectation I would be sick. So the expiry date, it's just a safe date. And there's usually a longer period where it will still be good. And then after some time, then the process will happen and that food will expire. This comparison is for us to understand that that date did not mean that from that single moment on it would happen. Because when we study life, the Genesis says that when the spirit is, I'm sorry guys, with the noise in the back's hard. He says that 260 years ago it was announced that this transformation was already going on. The day has 24 hours. It starts at midnight. There's at noon, afternoon starts, and at midnight, the day finishes. maybe here I can do this comparison because the nights here in Calgary, it's so light, and depending on where we are, we have 6 months of daylight, pretty much, and 6 months of darker days. But if we talk about a different latitude where it gets dark at the end of the afternoon and the sun rises at um, 6 4 6 hours after midnight. When the clock gets to midnight, we are still in the previous day. When the two hands of the clock get together, it's the transition for the next day. When the bigger hand goes on to the next day, that's what Dr. Busy has said, that we cannot go back anymore. That means that 12:01 a.m. is as dark as 11:59. And when you meet someone 12:01, you don't say good morning. We If we say goodbye to someone after midnight, we say good night. And sometimes we are beside someone else. We are beside someone else when it's their birthday, it's after midnight, and we don't even say that. We wait till we get up the next day to say happy birthday because we don't realize that transition is happening. If it's still the darkness from the previous day or the darkness of the early hours of the next day, because that transition doesn't happen suddenly, because as we know, nature is the expression of God's thought, and God doesn't skip. Nature evolves slowly without being aggressive. It leads us to transitions very slowly. So we are already living in the regeneration, but we are still in the darkness of the previous day. We are we can't obviously imagine that regeneration is gonna happen in the very first minutes of the next day. But when that happens, the day when the sun rises, the day started 5 or 6 hours before, and we are at the dawn of a new era. That was already announced in the beginning of the Spirit's book, when Kardec says that the Spirits announced that the divine providence had already said that we were in transition. And as God's minister, these spirits were coming to instruct man and open a new path for humanity. So that was already the early hours of the new day, but we didn't realize it. And as time goes by, the day will dawn, and these transformations will lead us to these transformations, to these crises. But God does not abandon any of His children. He also gives us the tools so that we can use these tools for our growth, for our evolution, to progress without violate our consciences. And this instrument, this tool, is Spiritism, that is inviting us not to be changed because it came to us ready. The Spiritist doctrine is that big social network. Because if we ask anybody today who is the creator of social network, we're going to say the creator of Facebook. Nowadays, if I want to travel to a place I don't know, I go into any social media and I will get to know somebody who has been to that place already. I learn from that person what are the best options for hotels, and I can plan my whole trip. And I am gonna do all that planning following that person that did it before. And as I go on my trip, I can see that everything that was told to me was correct. And I can also understand some things that first person did not see that I see, and the next people who go after me can even take better trips than I do. Isn't that what we do in social media? The book is the spirit's book, not the spiritist's book. We are all spirits, incarnate and discarnate. As Kardec said, the spirits came to announce how life works in the spiritual plane. They came to tell us to value life because life is beautiful. Enjoy your life while you are incarnated. I, spirit, today I'm at a place that I am happy because I was a good person, and the little good that I did brought me happiness. Other spirits came and told us I was a suicide. It's not worth to do it. I suffered a lot. I was dragged to regions of suffering with thousands of others who were there as well. I was surprised because I took my own life, and when I thought that my problems would disappear, I was I wasn't pro death, but I wasn't strong enough to face the challenges that life was posing me. And because of that conflict that I could not get over, the materialist literature told me that death was the solution because after death everything is finished. And I thought that my pain was too harsh, so I killed myself to finish it. And I realized that death does not exist, that life is only one. And I suffered a lot for a long time because I committed suicide way before I was supposed to have discarnated. It's not worth it. Suicide's not worth it. Others came to talk about their experiences, and in this way, we created a big social network that unfortunately we, spiritists and non spiritists, but we do not value the information that the social network brings us because we are all gonna take that trip no matter what. The day we are born, the date that we're gonna die is set. The moment we die, we are born, we are already dying. And the moment that we die, we are already counting the time when we're gonna reincarnate. And this social network that the spirits bring us is already telling us how the spiritual life works too. Hell, purgatory, how Dante's hell was accepted in the past. Both hell, purgatory, and heaven, they are all inside of us. They are in the way that we do good or choose not to do good. And all of us will take that trip sooner or later. But unfortunately, not all of us follow the directions of the spirits who came before us and told us what we need to do to be happy, both here or in the spiritual plane. They came to tell us the best way to act using this tool, which is Jesus, brought back in the light of Spiritism, because Jesus said, I am the door. But when we see Kardec, Kardec says that the Spiritist doctrine is the key to that door, so that we can, Spiritism is the key for us to understand the door that is Jesus and his gospel. And many of us have the key in our hands. The door is right there, but sometimes we choose not to bring the key to the door, we just hold the key. We're just looking for the way to get to the door. And when we open that door, there's only one way. the way. And we are living moments of transition. We are at a crossroads because a crossroads has more than one way. That this that is has many ways and not all are the right way. This incarnation is a single incarnation in our lives. It's an incarnation that we will remember throughout our evolutionary process. Because now we remember 2000 years ago, we remember Jesus. Did we live at his time? Did we hear about him at that time? Maybe we were at one city, he went by and somebody said, "That's the Nazarene." And he was followed by tens or hundreds of people. And we just looked and we said, "Oh, that's the Nazarene, that person who cures people." And we said, "Fine." But we didn't really care. And Jesus just passed by that city. And now, 2000 years after, he's back. And we are before him. Are we in the future remember that again, for the second time, Jesus came back through the promised consoler? Did we hear about him? Did anybody talk about him? But because my attention is more towards material things, did I hear it? Did I register? Did I try to follow him? Because when he said he was gonna when he said he was gonna send another consoler, he said that consoler was gonna stay with us forever. Because when we study history, we see Moses, who is a personality, and we see Jesus, who is another personality. But the consoler isn't a single person, isn't one personality. That's why the consoler stays, because it has come to stay. It's a doctrine, it's a new science that comes to bring information in a progressive way. Just like Allan Kardec said, if in the future science finds out a truth that the Spiritist doctrine doesn't contain, stay on the side of science. The fact is that in 160 years, it's quite the opposite. Science, which is looking for truth, science is now looking for all the truths that the doctrine brought us before. In the last 160 years, from the end of the 19th hundred century, with so many changes in science and technology, preparing for a new century, the 20th century, where humanity went through two big wars that killed millions of lives. All that technological development, which was one which was so much development that humanity had never seen before in such a short time. It brought us comfort, new instruments and tools. Then we get to nowadays, and speaking like a pilot, the Spiritist doctrine took off at the end of that century. It, it went on the air. It went through all these changes and variations throughout that century, and it was a very calm flight without a turbulence. And that means that we are before a true message, a message that free us. The moment that we get to know it, that we meditate on it deeply, and we try to bring it to our lives. That's why the third moment when we should apply the Spiritist ideas in our lives, that's the moment we are going through. We are born in a world of trial and expiations. We who are still incarnated will disincarnate in a world of regeneration. That's why this incarnation for us, it doesn't give us time, because when we go back to the spiritual world and when they talk about the next incarnation for all of us, all the trials are chosen by ourselves. If we have no condition of choose our own trials, the spirits who are responsible for the reincarnationary process will do it for us. And if we get to the spiritual plane and we analyze this last incarnation, and we get to the conclusion that we have gone through all the trial and expiations we need, the divine laws, if we get to the spiritual plane and we analyze that everything that we sold was good, it's natural that the next incarnation will always will, will put us in a world that is according to our actions. If we get there, we are not going to inherit the earth. That's why when Genesis tells us about the migration of spirits, Emmanuel's book, when Emmanuel tells us about the exiled from Capella, we are going through a similar transition. Those of us who do not plant goodness will be exiled to other planets. If in these days of regeneration we don't work on our own change, we are not going to stay. And that's why we don't have time anymore. So we are not invited to change the doctrine. We are invited to change ourselves. The Spiritist doctrine needs testimony of those who already know and apply these ideas in their lives. Because if we do that, we are going to be regenerating ourselves and humanity. We are going to be giving a good example to those who live around us. And we're going to observe that that behavior is different. It's not different because it's false. No, all the thoughts and actions make sense according to everything that Jesus taught us 2,000 years ago. And that example is showing us how we should relate to each other so that we can love our neighbors and remember the new commandment that gave us in the Last Supper when he was preparing us for what was coming in the future. None of us, when we are asked, "Are you a spiritist?" and we say yes, none of us are going to the Holocaust. We are not going to jail, because in the past that did happen, as we saw here today, mainly in Brazil. It was forbidden to be a spiritist. At that time, saying you were a spiritist, it was a crime. You could be arrested, just like the first Christians suffer. But nowadays, all the time, when we are asked, "Are you a spiritist?" and the answer we need to give, because the world invites us to the things of the world. But we need to ask, what Lord am I serving? Am I serving to the world Lord or to the Lord who promised us the Consoler? Jesus, God's envoy, who came to show everybody the true feeling of his major law that we did not know until that time. That's why when Jesus came to us, he gave us a sentence that we know: glory, glory to Lord, and peace to men on earth. Goodwill is the first item of order in charity. On the day men have goodwill towards each other, we're going to be happy on this earth. It's going to be a regenerated world where Jesus will be recognized for everybody as the model and guide of humanity. Just to finish, the Spiritist doctrine is here today as an instrument that will fulfill its role on the day that religions, because when people are asked what's the religion of the future, on the day that no matter what religion you profess, the universal principles that the Spiritist doctrine brings us, that Jesus told us 2,000 years ago, that Jesus brought to us when all that has been accepted for all of us, the Spiritist doctrine will have fulfilled its role and it doesn't need to exist anymore because all of us are going to be fulfilling the divine laws: law of society, equality, labor, law of justice, charity, law of love. All of these loves that the Spiritist doctrine brings us, that are divided in 10 laws by Moses so we can understand them better. So the only religion we want is the religion Jesus taught us, is the creation connected to the creator, because as God's children we all have a tie with the creator, whether we like it or not, whether we believe it or not. But as God's children, we are connected to him and we belong to him, and we will evolve, and evolution will lead us to the level of being angels, and we'll only be happy on the day that we fulfill God's law and we follow Jesus' message. And Jesus says, let's follow the gospel of Jesus under the Spiritist light, understanding God's laws. May our conscience be at peace by that choice. May that be the strategy for all of us. And may the fortress of prayer be part of our lives so that we can keep going with Jesus, growing, loving each other, and looking our brothers in humanity and sisters in humanity and seeing them as true brothers and sisters, because we are all on the same path. We all have the same opportunity of growth, and we all have the same instrument at our disposal. May Jesus make us strong today and always. Thank you. Thank you very much, my brother, for your beautiful words. So we are going to be open to questions. If any English speakers want to ask questions, please go ahead. Dear George, thank you for such important words and the importance of staying faithful to good, to Kardec, and to Jesus. And we've been gifted by the library's drums. But within the Spiritist movement, we have noticed that people are lacking discernment. They lack this fidelity. What kind of effort would be necessary that we so that we can keep with the Spiritist doctrine? Thank you for the question. And the word of order nowadays is that discernment. Discernment means common sense, and that's what Kardec used to say. So it's necessary that we practice the Spiritist doctrine because Kardec himself recommended that the work should be done in solidarity and tolerance. Let us remember the classification he gave us for Spiritists. The true Spiritist is the Christian Spiritist. The researcher who worries about the phenomena and is just curious is this before the knowledge that Spiritism brings us that makes that person happy. What a beautiful philosophy. What a great science. But that's all. The person who is just excited doesn't help the movement because that person has no discernment. That's the person who listens something and it goes out the other ear. So, for example, the authors we heard about Leon Denis, Allan Kardec, several names, but I'm gonna bring up a name of a certain philosopher called Socrates. If I ask the audience if anybody remembers how many judges judged Socrates, I'm sure nobody remembers. If anybody answers right, I'll stop speaking and I won't say a word anymore. But Socrates' name, everybody knows. Nobody knows his judges' names, in not even how many they were. But if I'm a spiritist who's just excited about it, I went to the place, to the spiritist center you go to, and I heard about Socrates. After that, I left the meeting. I'm sorry, guys, I can't hear with the noise in the background. Oh, so he's saying that someone who heard about Socrates at the Spiritist Center, I left the Spiritist Center, and I'm talking about Socrates to everybody else I see. I'm just excited about it. How many people are called Socrates? Many. And if somebody receives a mediumistic message from Socrates, how many people are called Socrates? Many. So it doesn't mean that it was the philosopher Socrates, but it could be anybody, any spirit called Socrates who gave the message. But I automatically assume it was the philosopher. But because I was just excited, I didn't have discernment to understand that it was not Socrates the philosopher, but it could have been any other Socrates. Most of us are imperfect spiritists because literature tells us, clarifies, we are admired with all the principles, but we still cannot apply the principles in our lives. There are very few making the effort to bring the knowledge into their daily lives. These are the true spiritists or the Christian spiritists. So, in the Spiritist Center, we will see four kinds of spiritists, and the coexistence with them has to be solitary and charitable. For those of us who want to be true spiritists, Christian spiritists, we are examples. The way we live, our thoughts, the practice of charity, indulgence, tolerance, forgiveness, if we bring to these to our lives, we can avoid the conflicts. that usually come to us. If we analyze, we can verify that everything starts with the simplest things. And Jesus told us a divided house will fall. And that's why Jesus preached the practice of fraternal coexistence. But we need to have discernment because our example will certainly help someone else. You mentioned, sorry, I can't hear anything. Could you talk a bit more about some of the messages of Bezerra, messages of unification and reunion, and how can we promote union and unification in the Spiritist movement? We can explain a very simple way. You you can't unify without God. We can all be here together, but are we treating each other as brother and sisters? If we are, if you're not fraternal to each other, we're not united. So for us to be united, the condition is fraternity and union. And for us to be united fraternally, we need to have the same purposes. We need to tell each other what needs to be said, and the other person needs to understand. So if someone tells somebody else the truth, we analyze. That's one point of view. So that's a person's point of view. But what the Spiritist doctrine and the gospel of Jesus say is this: any person who has a point of view that makes sense compared to the gospel, that's okay. I'm sorry, I can't hear. We are not here to please everybody. We are here to divulge the truth. So, yesterday at Eric's house, I was able to talk about how we're supposed to tell the truth. The truth has to be told, but words hurt. Depending on how we tell the truth, it hurts. I can throw something at Eric's face and it could hurt him, but I could just pick something up and give it in his hand. So every time we tell the truth, so let's put one glass of love and one drop of truth. We usually do one glass of truth and one drop of love, and that hurts. Dr. Bezerra tells us about that, and he says, united, we will be resistant. Separated, we're just point of views. These are sentences that Dr. Bezerra says throughout his communications. In the first moment, in the year of 1889, when the posthumous message of Allan Kardec, Dr. Bezerra at that time accepted to be the president of the Brazilian Spiritist Federation, and he was there for 1 year and left at the end of 1 year. And in the beginning, he was able to get the Spiritists to understand the unification, but because of the proclamation of Republic in Brazil, he was not able to keep going with the Spiritist Federation. So when he left, the Spiritist movement and the Federation were at peace. After that time, it has been a constant fight for a work of unification in the Spiritist movement in Brazil. On the day we all apply the gospel in our lives, when we all apply the Spiritist ideas in our lives, then we will truly have the moment when unification will happen. But in order for unification to happen, it's necessary to have love and fraternity, that we love each other. Thank you, Georgie, once again. This is the end of our meeting. Thank you for the words, for the moments, spreading love and fraternity. Um, he's inviting them to do something, but I can't hear because he's speaking too low.